Let's talk about Germany now. So the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines fits perfectly with the World Economic Forum's plan to take Europe off of fossil fuels. This has been the plan all along. Now it's accelerated. The war helped. COVID helped it. The war helps it. And now, of course, attacking the pipelines puts the plan fully in place. But will Germany give into this plan? That's the real question. Will Germans rise up? We're seeing protests in Prague today and across Europe saying no to this. We're seeing it across the Netherlands. Will people rise up and revolt? Someone who has been covering the story extensively as an academic researcher is Ralph Schoelhammer. He's been one of the few keen voices calling out the hypocrisy of the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, and this ridiculous move by these countries to put in draconian regulations against these farmers and these citizens. Ralph joined me a short time ago, and I started by asking him if the German people will even tolerate this.
People in Germany are very, very angry. The weekly newspaper Der Spiegel, a well-renowned left-leaning newspaper, did a poll where they asked the people kind of what is their general mood, their general emotional state. And 42% answered it's anger. That's higher than it was during the height of the corona pandemic, and that's about twice as much as it was 3 years ago. So the German people are angry. The German people always kind of at least had a kind of a latent sympathy, let's put it this way, for Russia, and there was always a strong subcurrent of anti-Americanism. So again, I'm just laying out here all the factors they're going to play into each other. So if it should turn out that, for example, there is neither a full refutation of US and Polish involvement in what happened in the last 24 hours, or if potentially in the, let's say, worst possible case, there is an admission of any kind, I think the kind of public swing in opinion that we're going to see in Germany will be massive. So there we're no longer talking about secret support, hidden support for Ukraine. I think this will be a significant shift.
So if we already have President Biden in February saying that we will take out the Nord Stream pipeline, we have Victoria Nuland, who, of course, is responsible for installing a puppet regime inside of Ukraine, saying we will put an end, one way or the other, we will put an end to the Nord Stream pipeline if Russia invades. To me, it's like Occam's razor at this point. So wouldn't there already be this growing sentiment, this distrust of the United States inside Germany? And again, we see the leaked RAND report a few weeks ago here on the show. We featured that, the documents that talked about a weakening of Germany, a strengthening U.S. And one way to do that, and one specific piece of that report was around Germany's dependence on Russian oil. By cutting that off, you weaken Germany, you strengthen the United States. How aware of that are the German people?
I think more than we generally recognize. You see it particularly in online forums. I was recently on a debate show in German TV, and if you look at the comments below, I mean, that sentiment, what you just described, is very widespread. And let me immediately add, I'm not saying that this sentiment is unfounded. Right. What befuddles me from side of the United States, and I think this is a very, very geopolitically unwise move by the United States. On the long run, the US, whatever we think about the role as the global hegemon, they cannot go it alone. The United States will not be strong enough kind of to balance the Pacific and the Atlantic. So they need a reliable partner. And I would argue that the best reliable partner they could have would be Europe. So I think there should be an interest in a strong Europe. But apparently within many kind of security circles within the United States, they don't see it like this. Now, regarding Germany, there's always the problem. It's a mixture of distrust towards the Americans, but it is also to some extent their own stupidity. I mean, we talked about this the last time we were on, like whatever the designs of the US are, and I'm not denying that they exist, but particularly in the realm of energy. I mean, Germany inflicted a lot of pain on itself as well, right? We talked about this, whether it's turning off nuclear, whether it's putting all the energy, both politically and literally, into renewables, creating this dependency on Russia, banning fracking, kind of banning alternative sources of energy that Germany would have full control of. I mean, this was self-inflicted. So Angela Merkel was not forced to take those steps. I guess it's a mixture of external pressure and also a mixture of internal stupidity.
So then where does Germany go from here? Are we looking at, we just saw what happened in Italy, right? We saw a country elect overwhelmingly a new leader who wants to put Italians first, wants to put family first, wants to put Italian infrastructure first. And that seems, it's crazy to think that that is now considered rebellious in some way, like standing up for your own country in that way. And you're obviously seeing the protests. You've been debating this on this topic in Germany. You're seeing people taking to the streets. The Western media won't cover these protests. They're largely ignoring the protests in Berlin and other parts of Germany. So where do you think Germany moves over the next
No, I
few
think
years?
you're absolutely right. What we currently see in Germany, but I would extend it to all of Europe. This is, if you want to speak in Wagnerian terms, this is Götterdämmerung for the old continent. So the decisions they're going to make, let's say in the next 6 to 8 weeks, will be decisive for the decades to come. And what this means is, and I think you already kind of moved the conversation to this direction, which I would wholeheartedly agree, Europe needs to learn to stand on its own feet. But standing on its own feet means independently, not just of the US, right? It also will mean standing independently of Russia. It will also mean standing independently of China. And this means that many of the ideological preconceived notions Europe has indulged in the last couple of years, and we talked about this extensively, so I can only advise the listeners to listen to our previous conversation. They need to stop to indulge in these ideological ideas of, energy transitions, and we're going to power Europe with wind and solar and all these, right, kind of social luxury beliefs that are completely disconnected from what matters for people's daily lives. And you're right, we see it in Italy. I think we're also going to see it in the UK. As you have also talked on the show before, the UK economy is on the brink. They are in much worse conditions than we would have expected. Same is true, as we just mentioned, about Germany. Winter is not here yet, so I think the actual energy shortages, they will only start to bite in the next couple of weeks. And then there is another topic that, as many have not, but gratefully you have covered, that is the coming fertilizer shortage. So we're gonna looking at actual food shortages or shortages in agricultural products in Europe next year. And one could say, well, is it really going to be that bad? Well, that depends on the population. Let's look at it. Let's look at Argentina. Right? I mean, countries like Argentina, kind of that are somewhat used to defaulting on regular. And this is not indicting the Argentinian people, whom I very much like, but they're kind of used to economic hardships. They're kind of used to that they cannot trust their currency, that you have to prepare yourself for bad times. This is not something Europeans or Americans, for that matter, are really prepared for. It all reminds me, gets kind of my last sentence on this. There is, I think it's Rocky V. There's this famous conversation that Sylvester Stallone has with his son. And he says, it doesn't matter in the boxing match how hard you can hit. What matters is how much you can take. And I think this is very true in the current situation as well. The question is not who's going to suffer more in the current economic developments. The question is who can take it. And I'm very worried that Europeans simply can't take it, because we have, decadent is a strong word, but we have gotten complacent, we have gotten comfortable, and we have allowed ourselves to become the kind of the billiard balls that have been pushed around by other powers in the world. So this was not just imposed on us, giving, for example, the dependency on the United States. Nobody forced the Europeans, even if the United States preferred it, to be dependent in their security on the US. The Europeans could have built their own autonomous security structures, but we didn't want to, because the temptation was too great to use the money for other things and kind of allow the United States to foot the bill. So there's blame on both sides, I would say.
I'll get you out of here on this, Ralph, which is, how bad do you think it's going to get? I mean, we can talk numbers. You talked about the fertilizer shortages. We don't yet know because we're not in winter yet. Are you seeing data pointing to a real hard time for not only Germans, but throughout Europe?
Yes, and I think that the two most important data points for this is, if you look at how European governments are reacting, their solution to an actual supply shortage of energy, which, if we kind of take natural gas and the broader issue of energy, their solution is to pump money into the system. But the problem is, the Americans can, because everything is paid in dollars, but the Europeans cannot print energy. So, for example, if there is no gas, it doesn't matter if you give a household, an individual, or a company an extra, and I'm exaggerating for dramatic effect, an extra $1 billion, because there is no energy, there is no gas they can buy. But European governments will try to paper it over with just pumping more money into the system. So you are on a course not just to massive inflation, I would argue, and I hope I'm wrong. That's always my thing, right? I'm a doom monger who hopes to be wrong. But this is much more on the course to hyperinflation than anything else. So and what that means is, the government then cannot, because we have historical evidence for this in every single country where it happened, the government can then not distribute the impact of this. So the impact is going to be absolutely devastating for the working class, the middle class, and everybody who's on a, let's say, fixed cash income, because they will no longer be able to buy food as they were used. So do I see there is somebody who I value very much, Michael Yon, right, who's predicting there might be actual real famines in Europe? I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think that famines can be avoided, like people literally starving to death. But is rationing in the cards? Yeah, energy is de facto already being rationed. Is food rationing possible, kind of World War II scenario? Yeah, absolutely. I think this is very likely. And the problem then is, are people willing to take it? Because we are now have talked, and that's why I like your question so much. We have not talked about the economic repercussions. But what we do not know is what will be the political repercussions. There is this weird idea, both in Europe and the US, you can go through this crisis and kind of come out of it without a scratch. That is a very odd thing to think, because we don't know. And now let us connect this to Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. So the idea was, which was already a very low bar, to get through the winter, right? So people won't freeze in the winter. That's a very, very low bar for supposedly one of the most developed areas in the world. But the idea, I think, subconsciously was, and then next year, the war is going to slow down, right? Relations somehow with Russia are going to be picked up again. And by February, March, April, gas will start to flow again. Well, that option is now off the table. So that Gordian knot has been cut by whoever did it, right? So that option is over. So I do not see the end point for this crisis. And then, as you correctly mentioned, then is a sowing time and we don't have fertilizer. So this is going to spiral. We still have massive migration problems that, again, with the exception of few media outlets like yours, nobody's talking about. So this is more and more becoming a perfect storm where there is no end in sight. And this worries me the most is politicians will tell their people, oh, don't worry, this is going to be over in a few weeks. And remember, and we talked about this as well, it's like COVID, right? 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And then those 2 weeks turned into 2 years. I'm not sure if the people are willing to do another quote unquote flatten the curve. And the tone deafness of European politicians, just to use this example, Ursula von der Leyen literally used the expression flatten the curve in regards to energy use, that we need to flatten the curve at peak usage. They don't even, and of course, most people immediately said, oh, wait a moment, we've heard that story 3 years or 2 years ago. And that what worries me the most. So at the moment, to answer your question in a more short version, I think it looks very, very gloomy at the moment. Because one are the fundamentals on the ground, both in regards to energy and production. And the second one is we have an incredible incompetent class of politicians. I would again say on both sides of the Atlantic. It's differences in degree, but not really in the major fact that they are not very good at what they're doing. And the bill is coming, and I think it's going to be much higher than many of us would have hoped for, would have expected.
Yeah, it's scary, and that's why we need to study our history, right? That's a very important piece of this. And then, of course, look at our present as well. Look what happens when you cut off energy to Africa. This is what happens. You have a migrant crisis. You have people who don't have food. You have famines, right? We're already witnessing it. We're witnessing it in Afghanistan. So we don't have to go very far to see what humans can do. And this is a man-made crisis. I think you and I probably agree with that 100%, that this is man-made.
Now look at it. I mean, because this is also something you alluded at the beginning, and I kind of want to support your point here. We have allowed ourselves to be trapped by idiotic, and I'm not somebody who curses a lot, but I make an exception here, by idiotic ideas that were pushed by, for lack of a better expression, very rich people who probably have just a guilt complex because they are very rich. Because that's what, for me, the WEF basically is, in a sense, right? It's a therapeutical institutions where people try to atone for whatever they think the crimes are of them or their cultures by sacrificing all our futures. To give you one quick example for this, because you mentioned Africa, the EU and the United States de facto and deliberately prevent Africa from developing its own energy resources in the name of climate protection, And then when the Africans who cannot develop their own energy are literally starving for energy, and then as a consequence starving for real as well, then we say, well, that's due to climate change. No, it's not due to climate change. It's due to policies that we claim are in the name of climate change. And this is what we do. We hide now, and climate is just one topic here, right? We hide everything. So there are actual lives to be saved, but we don't do it because we quote unquote save the planet. It's maddening. And we need common sense people, whether it's you, me, kind of to increasingly stand up against this. We are not calling, at least I think neither you are. This is not calling for a revolution. It's calling for what you also initially said. It's calling for the lowest possible thing. We call for simple common sense, right?
Yes,
we make the very simple argument. Yeah, right. We make the very simple argument that wealth is connected to available energy, that wealth, particularly wealth for a large number of people. We make the very simple argument that people should have the right that if they switch their light switch at home, that the light turns on. So our bar is very, very low, and still there are these pressures that kind of want to turn this, not just take this away, but want to make this increasingly difficult. And I think it's time to stand up against this and say, listen, if you make $1 million a year and you want to buy an uber expensive electric vehicle, good for you, go for it. But I think the average person should still have the right to buy their gas fueled pickup truck or whatever it is they need to use. I think it's just it's a common sense thing.
Yeah, and to own their own farms. Our guest is Ralph Schoelhammer. He's one of the few voices on this calling out this hypocrisy, and we really appreciate your viewpoints on this. Ralph, thank you so much for joining us as always here on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ralph. I really wish I was as smart as that. Very, very smart guy. Very, very smart guy. And you can see just putting all of these pieces together as an academic researcher and tying these things together. And it's why I think it's so important when he talks about studying history.
Yes.
We are repeating ourselves.
Right.
This is why you study history, because we are repeating ourselves and causing this catastrophe.
Yeah. I mean, we can, I just feel like everything that happens every week, I'm like, I don't think we're being told the truth about that. Let me go find a book about it. And that becomes more and more necessary day by day. I can't find the time to read enough context to figure out why the heck people are accepting certain things in this world that seems asinine.
Yeah, I'm reading right now Fossil Future by Alex Epstein, and it is one of those books that you're going to throw it against the wall. You're like, no, we've been lied to for so many years about this stuff.
Yeah.
So I've been talking to Alex. Alex is going to be a guest here on the show. But again, these are the things you need to learn, and we need to study these things. And that's why I'm so thankful to have you all as part of our Redacted community here. We're standing up. We are rebels standing up against this hegemony.